Hello. Today we're going to be talking about staying ahead of the client. Our theory is that clients aren't buying you to run a technical implementation or buying a group to come in and just run their process. They're buying us to take us to an outcome, to take us to a specific place. And to do that, we've got to be relatively sophisticated about how we help the client along the way and kind of stay ahead of them, and that's the basis of our time together today. This is Anthony Paluska, and I'm Dean McMann, and we're both partners with McMann and Ransford, and we've both invested a lot of time bringing the Consultants Way, which is our effort to help our industry continue to keep up its standards and leverage best practices. So, Anthony.
Yeah, so Dean, what I think we should do today as part of this is break the overall client journey up into a couple of different sections and talk about it that way. And we'll spend some time on what do we do at the project start, right? How do we make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success so that we can stay ahead of the client? Then we'll dive into and spend a little bit of time on the kind of the delivery aspects of it, the day-to-day, where most of the consultants spend their time managing the client through to an outcome. And then how do we make sure that client is set up for an upsell and continuation so that we can spend that journey together? Does that make sense for you?
Sure.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
And then throughout the entire conversation, in the Teams meeting, there's a Q&A section. So if there are any questions, we'll take those questions. We may address some of them along the way, and then we'll certainly address any open questions.
Yeah, we'll make
at
sure
the end.
before we leave any questions we'll answer.
Sure. So let's start at the beginning, right? A simple or a logical place to start. As you think about managing a client and setting the stage for staying ahead of them, what are some things that you would do to make sure that gets off on the right foot?
Yeah, so one of the tools we use is the steering committee tool. And we all have steering committees, we all do, but we have found through our research and working with clients that we're not really using them properly to their utmost to help the project be successful, to help the key themes, we'll talk about themes a lot today, and to help the upsells and the expansion in the account to handle things like scope, antibodies, things like that. So when you think about the steering committee, we like to have the client understand the value of the steering committee, its importance from the sales cycle, so that when we begin afterwards, because what we're really doing in the first couple of steps is kind of, if you will, replanning the entire project, making sure we're all on the same page, because often clients buy and they don't really understand, and we do a plan and that plan's not perfect. So setting the steering committee up first, we like to see an odd number of people on the steering committee, 3 to 5. Mm-hmm. And I'd love your thoughts on this. I always say the key executive that's most effective, her line of authority up that's high as we can get, and then an executive who's not involved, who's respected across the organization, an odd number because they can make decisions, a small number because they will make decisions. If you find yourself with a steering committee with 10 or 12 people, that's really a cohort that you're keeping updated. That's not really a steering committee. In that case, have a non-called steering committee special group you deal with that takes the place of the activities we would do on the steering committee.
Yeah, so another individual I would include in that process, and then maybe we could talk a little bit how to manage this, because sometimes there's different stories that we want to tell to different audiences that are still part of that same steering committee group, is the client counterpart for the project leader. And so somebody that is involved intimately in the day-to-day project activities, different than our sponsor, different than our sponsor's boss in some cases, different than another executive. This is someone that can sit side by side with us and explain the kind of the status, the things that are blocking a particular project, and that sort of thing. But sometimes that individual is part of the people that we need to talk about with the steering committee as well. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how we manage that role in particular.
It's a very good point. I absolutely like having the client talk to their people, mm-hmm. because it brings in a little more empathy from them, and they talk in their language, and we're hung up on our own language sometimes. If you found that you need to talk about the client project lead, what we use when we say steering committee, we're including meetings before the steering committee and meetings after the steering committee. So that circle is to accomplish a goal. So I would take those particular messages out and take them early. Say, we're not going to be able to talk about, Jimmy Johnson in the meeting, our counterpart, but know this. He's not able to dedicate enough time. This is really above his capabilities and knowledge. And always have an alternative proposal to a client when you're giving them a problem.
Yeah. And so I want to spend a bit more time on steering committees since it sets the stage so much, and it's the formal opportunity that we have to do things like manage the project throughout it, provide updates, foreshadow what's going to happen and problems that we anticipate or situations we expect to run into. So from you mentioned we set this up as part of the sales process or in the early stages of it. What guidance would we give the client to understanding their role, the frequency of how often we're going to have these steering committees? How do we make sure that these don't become unwieldy and they're not too frequent, but they're not too infrequent either, without knowing exactly what's going to happen yet?
Yeah, so when we say bring it up in the sales cycle, we really want them to understand this is part of their commitment for the project. And we really don't want to be ambiguous about it. We believe, and we've had a lot of clients do this, that it's told to them as early as a stakeholder meeting that success is driven by having a small group of people dedicated to the success of the project that have the power and the interest to deal with internal problems as the project goes forward. And let's be honest, most of the times project problems are because clients haven't allocated enough resources, don't understand, or unable, not unwilling normally, but sometimes unable to perform their role. Sometimes unwilling, sometimes unwilling. Well, you also touched on another thing was, if we're experts on this and we're driving them, we should already know where the problems are going to be. We should already know. We should predict, create our messages now so that in the first steering committee, as an example, you could have a section on, hey, well, let's talk about where things get off the road, right? And you label them, and then you track them along with your progress. And you mentioned this, but the steering committee is less about progress and more about problems, right? So many times we see that we go up like a QBR and we report our progress and they don't care, and we come out and nothing changed. We really need to leverage this as our way to make change. And they're used to that, right?
Yes, 75% of those conversations typically when we run into them are, here's the project status update, and then 25% are, here's the things that are problems that have already happened that we want to tell you about, and sometimes we need some support and assistance rather than that being foreshadowing problems that will come. And hardly any, if at all, is about setting the stage for what comes next in terms of an expanded relationship with us.
Right.
So from a, I want to go back to something you said early on, which is the whole first phase of the project and this entire initial, getting started and building that relationship together is about replanning. Just together figuring out what actually needs to happen. We understand the outcome, and the client is probably committed to that outcome, but the project plan, the activities, all of that stuff likely changes because we learn more about that client situation.
Yeah, it's funny to me that we confuse. It's a complicated world. Often we have salespeople involved, and we've got the proposal effort, but often we confuse the plan that got them to buy with the reality of the situation. And we need to be flexible early on and make them flexible early on. And I'm not saying redraft an agreement. Oh God, no, that took enough time. But use the steering committee and use our communication plan, which we'll talk about in a minute, to accept our reality, get them to accept the reality, and then drive for the outcome. I don't think I've seen one complicated project that was. Remember the old adage, a plan for battle is only as good until the start of the battle? It's the same thing with a project plan. So the first activities are all about what is it going to take. Now, that doesn't mean 2 months from now we don't learn something completely different. I mean, you and I've had that happen a lot of times. But there's a way to handle that. But for what we can predict and what we can get them to understand, we need to set, and we can begin to put in those themes that we have. What are our themes? Well, different projects, but as an example, a theme may be, we want you to buy the next project, which is a logical project. There are also expansions that are not logical. They're more aura. You like us, we can solve something, we'll go solve something else. But a logical, we need to be planning that theme. Also, there are other themes like, I know you've got experience just in the last couple of years with, there's a theme that this is so different than what you do, and such a big transition. We need to keep that theme going on, right? Because that causes a lot of delays and extra expense, and we got to get the client to double down and move forward, or they won't get to the outcome.
Yeah. So transformative efforts of any kind, they're going to be unique and customized based on what specific nuances that client has and what we need to account for. I think about it as the outcomes are what the client actually bought. Your project plan and the specific details of all the actions prove that we've been there before, we've done that before. Remember our big plan that was about the size of this table, it was hundreds and hundreds of lines, and it was printed out so everybody could read
thousands of lines. Thousands of
lines. But ultimately that specific plan was not what they bought, and so it's usually us and the consultants that are less comfortable with changing the activities in there, not so much the client. But we always have this fear of having that conversation. Once we know that this needs to be replanned in some sort of way, communicating about that and being ahead of the client on some of those things it's our uncomfortability. It's not a client ever really pushing back on that. Have you had a different experience?
No. But I like to think about us. So many of us, almost all of us, have some kind of analytical background, or we wouldn't be doing this. And I think about one of our ex-executives who really didn't like changing the plan, right? Because the plan makes predictability, and if you're worried about how many people are on the project, level of effort, your own personal energy, budget and everything. So the art of replanning and everything, we've tried to move up front and get us all to accept that we're in a different effort than just delivering the plan. Not that we're not starting delivering the plan, but we know the first few weeks in, we're really in the what's different than we expected, and what's they're expecting. Hey, they're bringing people into the program that hadn't heard anything about it yet, right? And we got the antibodies, we got other stuff going on. So just to add one more wrinkle, we like to have at this time what we call the first communication plan done. So a communication plan, not to make it any more complex than it is who needs to understand what, when for the project to go forward, who needs to understand what, when for the upsell to go forward, who needs to understand what, when so that these problems are dealt with. And you can assign different people. You can map. The CFO needs to understand this. She's going to have to be talked to 3 times, we think. We'll do that over 3 months. So you lay out, we always think there's only 2 tools you have, what you say and what you do, right? And we're pretty good at doing, but we're not really good at telling them why and how. Like I have a client right now that said, hey, I've got this problem with the CEO. This is what they need to do, but he says no. A project expansion for success. And I said, well, how often are you meeting with him and keeping him up to date? And did you foreshadow this? Well, no. Does this always happen? Yes. Well, you need to foreshadow it. He needs a frame, she, in this case, needs a frame of reference. And so that when you do come, we've already talked about it. We've confirmed you have the disease, we have the cure, and we can go forward. But you hit her flat-footed. I think you'll still get what you want to be successful, but put some information together and come back.
Yes, that makes sense. And so tactically putting together that communication plan, who is that? That's our project leader, the project leader and consultants? Is that the client get involved in that at all? What's the best practice?
Yeah, it's not really with the client, it's our team, but you do want to include everybody on the team. One, they have points of view, and they need to think this way. It's always about developing our people to think correctly. So we want to include the consultants, and we want to do it in a bull room, and we want to use a board and really get it right. Now, we're not going to be, like any plan, completely accurate, but we're going to move forward. We're going to gain information. We might find that, oh, well, the CFO is really against this project. Okay, let's replan how we talk to her. Oh, we find out the head of sales thinks this is the most important thing they'll ever do. Well, how do we leverage that? So it's a living, breathing thing. But you do it with your whole team, not the client, because they'll misunderstand. Mm-hmm. We never act in anything but the best interest in our clients. But some of the actions we do, and remember, they're paying a lot of money, and they're often thinking that you're trying to pull the wool over their eyes. Don't pull the wool over their eyes. But some of the things we do to be educational and proactive might look manipulative to them. So I've never had a client involved in that. But what we have had is our sponsors tell them what we're trying to do, right? Tell them what we're trying to do, and they can provide advice that we may not see.
Yeah, part of that communication plan and the assigning of who owns communication events and activities could be our sponsor, for example. Right?
Sure.
It doesn't have to be us owning all of those events, but we should plan it on our own rather than getting others involved in that process.
Often you need the client to carry messages and water, right? Yeah. And sometimes you're shopping for the right, we'd like the CEO to do it, but they're not going to do it. And, who's respected, and you're shopping for that. But once that's done, we've got the communication plan, we've replanned, we've recommunicated, maybe had a steering committee or two kick that off. We kind of feel like we're, at least for now, on the same page. Yep. And again, we assume we're not at the beginning. Yep. And I think that's also different for the industry. I think when people come on a project, they think, well, my little job is to do these 5 tasks, and then I want to get in and want to get out. And no, God, no, we don't want you to get in and out. We want you to get in, and we want you to love them. You can't help them in one project, and you can't help them if they don't pay for it. We want to be in there a long time. We want to really help them. We want them to value it. So this continuing to work it from the soft skills and the client and being ahead of them, it's very important.
So, and I want to shift into the kind of the delivery aspects of it once we've done some of that replanning here in just a second, and talk about a lot of those things you just talked about. Antibodies within the organization, people that aren't doing and playing their role, and how we need to support that, all of that. I'd like to talk about 2 different people in a communication plan, and if you've got some thoughts on kind of best practices for managing it. I think about the communication plan as, sort of people fall somewhere on 2 different axes, right? One is their buy-in about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and all of those things, right? Their commitment to it. And you would think it's connected, but it isn't necessarily connected, as you know, to the understanding of all the things that actually have to happen to achieve the outcome.
Sure.
So we've got lots of people that are, I'm willing to do this, I understand why, but I've never lived in a world that is different than the world that I'm in right now, and so the how doesn't make any sense, or is foreign to them, and we have to take them on an educational journey. If you wouldn't mind, tactics on both of those would be helpful. One is the person that definitely understands everything that needs to be done, but they are not a supporter of why we're doing this.
That's probably because they understand what needs to be done.
And it's probably more difficult than everybody else in the organization is giving
and
credit
they've been
for
through it.
And then the other one is that willing to support because they understand we need to head somewhere different than where we're at right now, but doesn't understand the details, but feels that they need to be involved.
Yeah, so a lot of thoughts, and I apologize. One is, or is this person an outlier? I mean, we have to deal with them separately because they're not in a cohort, or are they in a cohort we're educating? And then we like the idea of themes going across. So one theme is, if it's a transformation, how difficult is this? So that theme would make itself in almost all our communications. We would find a way to always come back to, well, remember, so like I was taking a huge company's biggest division from product sales to solution business. In every meeting with everybody, we always said, hey, remember, the solution business is a different business model. It's very difficult to feel comfortable in a different business model. There are many things that have to happen. Your role is a little different over time. Mm-hmm. And we kept the theme going. That helps a little bit. Then if they're in a cohort that must understand what's going to, maybe they're going to be heavily, maybe they're Europe, EMEA, and they're going to be heavily involved next year, right? And we're pre-case. Then we like to go through the detail of here's how it went over here, here's how it went over here. Now, the more difficult one, well, and they don't always listen, and I understand that. It's not like, we tell them one time, oh, I got it. No, it's why it's a theme. But the more difficult one is I understand, but I don't want to. I understand, but I don't want to. So that may be a passive antibody or a proactive antibody. So remember, when we replanned, we told them some truth. You will have antibodies. And we would like you to understand that with an antibody, you have very few choices. You can remove them from the area of, not change their job necessarily, although I have had clients
change
do
their
that.
role on the project.
Yeah, change their role in the project, isolate them. That's one. You have the ability to inform them that there aren't options in this. I have a client right now that sat down with his executive team. He's been a client many times. He said, this is the program. If you do not like this program, you need to leave the firm. Now, you're not going to make many executives like that, but I liked it. But and it's been very successful. But more than likely, you've got this sand, underneath your shield that's eating away at you, and they are not going to effectively deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. So first we try to get them. The next thing we do is we build much closer relationships with them, and that's opposite of what consultants want to do, right? We all want to stay away from people who don't like us and people who are difficult to deal with, and people who don't like what we're doing. We have found over 40 years that actually getting closer to them, spending more time with them, investing more in them, they can often become a big supporter. And I have a little story about that. There's a gentleman by the name of Jim Lewandowski who will probably see this. Jim was an IBM executive, a BMC executive, one of the key guys at Rackspace, and a board member of ours. When I met Jim, the first thing he said to me is, you're 2 minutes late. That's something I won't stand with. He doesn't even remember this because I reminded him. And I don't like what we're doing. I don't think that, So I used our methodology. I spent a lot of time with Jim. You know what I found out? Jim actually wanted this to happen, but he was very fearful about wasting time, taking time away from what he's got to achieve, and it affecting his career. Yeah. Right? But now he's a board member. He's a great friend. But my real argument is, it's not going to go away by ignoring it. Mm-hmm. And use the power of intimacy to help understand what the real problem is, and you might do it. But I'd really rather the client take care of it. Yeah. And I think that's 50-50. What's your experience with that?
No, I think for the most part, I think it falls onto the consultant to own that relationship and to build that intimacy and that trust and try to overcome that journey. I think there's a challenge of relying on the client to play that role, whether that's our sponsor, whether that's our project leader, whether that's someone else in the organization, to help motivate and drive their team member to action on a specific topic. But right, like all of this, we're the experts. The consultants are the experts in this specific space. And despite the client and the sponsor being an advocate for what we're doing and being committed to this journey that they're going on, whatever kind of journey that is, they can't possibly have the credibility in their team members' eyes that says everything's going to be okay, because they haven't lived through it, they haven't been there, and in most cases they're resistant. The antibody is resistant because they have some experience that suggests we've been through a journey like this before, we've implemented a technology like this before, it never resulted in the ROI
or every year we have a new initiative that never
that's right.
successful.
That's right. So they hearing that from an internal source is just, you've either had the same problems and experiences that I've had, so there's not that credibility there that could come if the consultant could build that relationship, build that trust, and convince them that this time is different, and here's how and here's why. So I think you said 50-50. I think even if it will get solved by the client, we have to assume more of the responsibility because we share the burden of when it doesn't go successfully.
And that's a really important thing of the whole attitude of staying ahead of the client, but a whole attitude of consulting. We own it.
Yeah.
Right. And as soon as you cop out and say they didn't do it, and as soon as you cop out, and I'm going to talk about the financials of that. We will talk about that today because we're not their doormat, mm-hmm. but we are more capable. and we don't have the forest for the trees problem, and we don't have a day job there. We own stuff.
Yeah.
We own success, right? And I think that attitude helps us a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So antibodies are one thing that as we're delivering we run into, and we've got to write intimacy and some other strategies to mitigate that. The communication plan, the steering committee, even. What about, because it happens sometimes at least. We start working on something. Somebody's been assigned to the project to work with us on it. They have roles. They have expectations, and we are now delayed or behind because the client didn't do their part in that.
You mean every time?
Do you have an experience?
Do you mean every time?
Have you ever run into that?
Well, yeah. When you were saying that, it reminded me of one particular kind that I'll come right back to. But normally, the client doesn't want the consultants doing everything. 2 reasons: budget, and because we want to learn. Right?
I think they say the second, they mean the first. But yeah.
Yes. But and we would like them to learn. Right?
Yes.
We would like to do transfer of knowledge. So, but they don't pick the best always. Sometimes they do. And they assign who they can, and they don't assign them full time. And the people who had to give them up, because you got this cycle. Yep. So almost always. So one thing we all do, I just want to go back, we all plan contingency in the project, right? We all give ourselves 20% budget more. But that is really for small changes, not really for this. So in the beginning, one of the things I always tell my client is one of the most normal thing that's going to happen to us every time is antibodies. Here's why they happen, and that your people will not have the time or the experience to perform their role. And I want you to know that as that manifests itself, we're going to come to you with proposals. Now, one proposal always is we'll add one more of ours. We won't take them off, but we'll add some more of our resources to actually do that. But the example I was thinking of when you said that, and I had this at a big company, is the person they assigned thought their job was to audit what we did and report on us. It was a horrible relationship. So they never did any work. They just came in and then told everybody else stuff we did they didn't like.
Yeah.
Right?
So adding somebody else to that project is
a budget issue.
Not free. Yeah.
No, it's a budget issue.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I want to warn them in the beginning.
Right.
I want to warn them. I am bold. Hey, when we're dealing with executives, we're often intimidated because we need money, right? And I need my career to go somewhere. We don't need to be, right? In actuality, they need stuff done. And they've been through a lot of hard things. They've used consultants before. So I find if we bring them up early and say, listen, if we're going to fall behind, it's going to cost you more this way, or we can add resource and cost you more this way. This is actually cheaper than that because you get your outcomes and everything. But that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to, I will even sit with, particularly if a guy's been, a woman's been a client before, I will say, I know this will happen. So let's plan now for it. So, but that's the way. But yeah, clients not able to do their role, I do think is the norm.
Yeah. So
don't be mad at them. Just be prepared.
Yeah. So you said, hey, I know this is going to happen. I've been through enough repeatable, the same project. I've seen enough of this before that I can anticipate that this will happen. And I think generally speaking, we can say that. Anybody can say that on any particular engagement. What if it's right? I think there's discomfort sometimes when it's a net new project, right? It's not something that.
I don't have any experience on this.
No.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Where as a consultant or as a project leader on something like that, I do not have experience with this specific type of engagement.
Right, so
I can anticipate the client's going to have issues of understaffing or doing underperforming in some sort of way, but I can't specifically point out here's the areas we need to watch out for to make sure we get the right kinds of people and plan for that and a mitigation plan.
So what I do in those cases and the particular kind of business we're in, we get a lot of those.
Often. Yes.
Yeah, because we're not a repeatable implementation firm, so we get a lot of that. So what our methodology says, and what I like to do is say, hey, at this date, we're going to come and do a clearinghouse of all problems, right? And they will be things like, but I don't know what they are yet because I haven't done this. But I don't want to scare them. I want them motivated to success. Yep. So I pick a date out, and then I work really hard with the team I'm with to say, let's extrapolate out now that we've seen them now. So, like as an example, we had a client that, clients are run by different departments, some by engineering, right? Well, I had a client that was run by HR, right? HR was the center, and that's because they had some financial problems, and they were, over time, they were really big, and they were kind of coming down the road. And maintaining the people and their feelings became the critical thing in the company, one of the best brands in history. So, it was run by HR. Well, knowing that and knowing the kind of message we had to deliver gave us, in that meeting of, if you will, clearinghouse of all concerns, we talked a lot about that with the CEO in a meeting before the steering committee. And she was great. She said, I hadn't realized that we had moved into that. Yeah. What problem does that cause y'all? Well, they don't. Their discipline is not P&L, and we're working P&L problems. So we need to get the P&L people to own their part, and they're just not used to doing that. But it was that thing out in the future that we worked towards to do, and told them we were going to do it. Again, I think it's all about thinking ahead and staying ahead.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, staying ahead. So other things that can happen though in the fight is you got two kinds of change management. I think two kind of scope management issues. One, big opportunities, right? And that's great because our processes work with that. But it's the 1,000 cuts that hurt you because we're such good people. Well, we'll just find a way to do that, and we'll find a way to do that. What I've done just in the last couple of years is, in the beginning, say, I need y'all to put in some funds now into the PO, into your thoughts, so that as we come up with minor and adding a person, doing this, we can facilitate that without having a journey through the finance department. And I was amazed that they all go, explain. This kind of problem. Oh yeah, those always happen. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Right. So because keeping momentum's important. You know what it's like when you're coming to the end of a phase and you're beginning another phase. Now those may be contractually in the same contract or contractually different. If you stop too long, you've lost those consultants. Yeah. All that knowledge. So you got to make sure they understand that we can't do that.
Well, you lose your consultants because they get staffed on other things, they move on, but you also lose the client's momentum around something like that.
Yeah, because they've made a promise to their people, and now a 2-month break, they begin to believe. You get more antibodies like that, right? They get, this is going to be like everything else.
Yeah. So how far in advance, as we think about, so I like the idea about increasing the size of the PO that's bigger than just the contract itself to allow for flexibility without the barriers of financial approval and things like that, right? Solve for that on the front end, even if it's not needed, make sure that that's embedded in there. As we think about kind of the big opportunities for upsell and expansion as we move closer towards the end of a project, that's the goal when we start positioning that more frequently. How early do we start that process? How early do we start communicating to our sponsor? Right? Is that as early as the first steering committee? Is that right? And how broad do we share some of that information? Because we know that they're going to need more help than whatever this first project is. Yeah. And so how do we start laying the foundation for some of that to stay ahead of what will ultimately be so it's not a surprise to them when that time comes. And the
decision's already made before you finish. Right. Let's divide this into small projects and long projects. Okay. So first, small projects. You've got, let's say you're a Lean Six Sigma. That's your tool, but you're a drive-in outcome firm. Well, those projects might be 6 months, might be 3 months, might be $1 million, might be $500,000. So, excuse me. You've really got to, by the second steering committee, and in that case, if I had that shorter period of time, I'd have steering committees every other week. Now, you don't want the overhead of doing all the report outs and all that stuff, so you got to get yourself into a little more flexible. I'll report out success and challenge and maybe monthly, but I want to meet with you every 2 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And I would, by that second steering committee, have forced myself to guess where else. These are independent projects that have their own outcomes. They're not a service chain.
Right.
I would force myself to in my communication plan go, I'm going to meet these people and these people and these people and these people so that by 6 weeks in, I know where else you need this, right? Mm-hmm. So that I'm building that journey, that account journey, and using my communication plan to get there. But if it's a longer project, then if it's a branch opportunity or a continuation opportunity, maybe not a service chain again, but still same team doing something similar, or if it's an introduction of a whole new topic. So an introduction of a whole new topic, when you know it, start working it.
And start sharing that with
the client and
anybody and everybody.
Yeah. Through your communication plan,
yep.
Right? Find out who the buyers would be, get your other experts in, explain the problem, right? That one is, as soon as known, make your plan. In a continuation, though, I think you want to be 1/3 before the end, mm-hmm. and start. You can lay the intellectual groundwork about the problem. If it's an implementation next, that's different. Yeah. That is a service check.
Yeah, design, implement.
Yeah. That's a
logical continuation.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can do that.
You've sold the whole thing up front.
Yeah,
so.
Psychologically, and
right.
Now you just want to avoid recontracting and people being off, But and the prices get bigger, right? So so do
the problems.
Yeah. Well, implementation is a little more difficult than strategy, right? So, but on this, I'm doing this, and then we're going to do that. I would start with a third left, and I might have talked about the problem, but I wouldn't have talked in the steering committee. I would find my sponsors and correlate over there, but I would be formal by a third left and go, listen, this is not going to be as successful here in the marketing department if we're not working the sales department. This is not going to be successful in the IT department if we're not also working the CIO's organization or the field organization where this stuff works. And I would start working that third out. And be very deliberate about it, right? It's part of the meeting. You have the pre-meeting, the post-meeting meetings. Be very deliberate about it. And again, that's an area where I think we don't do well.
I don't think we treat those surrounding meeting. I think everybody's always prepared for a steering committee, even if we're on slightly the wrong topics, like we talked about earlier. 75% of the time is spent on project updates.
They prepare.
Lots of preparation, but the pre-meetings and the post-meetings are just as important to prepare for. They're not casual conversations.
No.
It's very deliberate. There's a few messages that need to go to a certain audience beforehand so that the stage is set for that steering committee, and then there are specific follow-up actions to have afterwards that we could probably know in advance before the steering committee even occurs who we need to talk to and what we need to talk to them about based on the responses in that room.
Absolutely. Yeah. But as you said, preparing for those, one of the things, again, we're analytical. We do not want them to feel like this is a report out meeting. Right. It is a one-on-one. And by the way, why do we always stress in our firm more one-on-one meetings, ideally over coffee or outside the office? Because people won't share a truth in a group. You can't build intimacy in a group. You can't be your true self in a group. It just works much better. So these are one-on-one meetings, and you want it to be organized and deliberate, but casual. Mm-hmm. Like cohorts talk to each other, like executives talk to other executives. Otherwise, if you're too organized, this is really a big deal. If you're too organized, you're going to look like a supplicant, that you're below them, and they can't build a relationship with somebody below them, right? So you've got, and it doesn't matter about your age. It doesn't matter about your age.
No, it has to be viewed as a partnership. You're bringing something to the table, they're bringing something, and we have a mutual outcome, which is the success of the engagement.
Right. So don't bring a presentation. Don't bring hey, on Tuesday, just tell them, be organized, be deliberate.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So we prepped. We started a project to make sure we've got the foundation laid. We've talked about the antibodies and client not doing their job and building intimacy along the way and the different areas to do that, and we've set it up for an upsell. What else have we not covered that's a key tool or concept for you?
The only thing that I would hound on for people to really get is the difference between a really good steering committee process and a really good communication process is taking it seriously and prepping. As an example, if someone in your firm's in the steering committee, they should have a role.
Yes.
Right? If somebody had a meeting on the communication plan, we need feedback. it is really not casual. I had a CEO tell me recently, I've been using this, Dean, and it kind of, you're right, all I got to do is show up. And I immediately tell them, no, you don't just have to show up. Yeah. Good things happen because of intimacy, but you have a role here. You got to be, I said, and he had a new CEO and his client, he's a consulting firm, new CEO and his client, he met with her, it went really well. I said, did you tell her this? No. Well, I thought that was one of your key themes. Oh, well, it didn't come up. Well, that's not her job, right? So prep, and then it becomes natural.
Yeah. We there's like an epidemic about meetings, QBRs, whatever the case. People call them whatever they will, and that being a catch-all for every conversation we want to have with the client to try and make it efficient on the clients or something like that. And we bring 40 people to a meeting like that, and there's the sales team, and there's the professional services and the consulting team, and there's everybody that wants to either learn something or share something or might get called upon at some point to talk about some aspect of it that gets involved in that. And those are not substitutes for any of this, and in fact, I think they work against a lot of the things we're talking about here.
If you're going to do that because you're forced to, because of your organization, that's great. Rebuild everything around it. I just had one where a strategic account person told me they're having all their clients fly in, and they're having all their executives come in. What are your messages to them? I don't know. We'll get everybody to tell their little bit. I said, so you're having your client take up their time, and you're not really playing the role of an account exec. You're just a conduit to a bunch of other people to talk about stuff that they don't know the client, they don't know the details.
And they're busy with running the business as well, so they can't possibly have the detail about that specific client.
No.
They're a figurehead's probably a little soft of a word there, but they're there to show that client's important to us, not to add value to the long-term relationship and the success.
And you've wasted your client's time. So I'm not saying there's not a time for that, and we're not really working that today.
No.
There is a time in staying ahead of the client when you feel like you're losing control of the client, not being listened to for whatever reason. Yeah. For whatever reason, you can bring in a more senior to help you get back on track, but not in the normal day-to-day meetings and stuff. But so if we're now doing well, and we're doing it, and we've got our slush fund for upsells, we've branched to other deals, and we're managing the client right, and we're talking to them. The only tool we haven't talked about in that is sometimes it's good to map out who's a champion, who's against you, who learns this way, who learns that way, just so that when we send somebody in for the meetings, they're always briefed about the person. Sometimes people want to brief you by where they went to school and blah, blah, blah. What we really want to do is make sure you understand the person and how they feel about us. So now upsell. Yeah. So if we're doing all that well, it's very, we've got to be bold. We've got to feel like this is in their benefit. They've got to pay money for it, or they won't honor it. They won't be involved. And don't pick an upsell that is not going to get approved, because it's just the only thing you could find. Mm-hmm. So on the upsell, be bold. Start with the pre-meetings to the steering committee where you're going to talk about it. Tell them what you're going to do. We could do a whole session on upsells.
Sure.
But talk about what it is. Bring the facts, give them a frame of reference. Here's the benefit, here's why you got to do it, or the detriment if you don't do it, and get buy-in, then bring the steering committee. Get buy-in to the concept, not the price. Bring the steering committee, get them to ask you to develop the concept, which means a plan, and then bring the plan back to them. The best projects, by the way, have a plan already in the budget for the next project. Right. But I think if you be deliberate in everything, you'll...
Yeah, and if we've done everything else well and stayed ahead of them on how the project's going to go, we've delivered it successfully, or if there have been hiccups, they've been anticipated by us and mitigated as far in advance as possible, and they know that the upsell and what the project looks like is coming, then that whole conversation becomes a lot easier than if we didn't stay ahead of the client throughout that whole process and didn't plan for either the sale or the project challenges that naturally arise.
You're not going to win if you play defense.
That's right.
You only win if you play offense. So were there, I want to turn it back to any other questions that anybody has today. As we've gotten questions, we tried to blend them in. Yeah, so the question is how do we initially tell the client about antibody issues in the moment when we want to work through it? So let's assume for this scenario, we didn't tell them that's coming, right?
Uh-huh.
We weren't well trained. We didn't know that's coming, or that's not part of our process. Our company's against it, whatever. So now, what I like to do is go to my sponsor and act like I'm surprised, because I don't want to come off negative or blaming. I want her motivated to get in the boat with me. So I said, Carol, this is what's going on. We're pretty much convinced that James over in the UK is really against this project. And here are the things we've seen that make us feel like that. First of all, what do you think about that? So she's going to, one of three things. I didn't know that. I believe you. I knew that. Or I don't believe you, and we're going to have to spend some more time on it. Mm-hmm. But eventually she's going to believe you because it's truth, right? So I want to get it, and I want to get it in a comfortable place. Once I have her bought in, I want her to propose to me who I put on the communication plan. I don't say it like that, but who am I going to deal with to bring this back in to success, right? Who's going to help me with this? And we talked about how to do that earlier, but that's how we start the process of getting the issue on the table. Anything else before we wrap up? This has been great. We appreciate everybody joining. I hope you've got a lot of value on it. In a couple of weeks, our next topic will be how to create offers that both support selling, drive outcomes and upsells, and make it easier on the consultant.